We have made it back.
Sorry we couldn't get this episode up last week, and we can't blame tech issues this time.
No, we absolutely cannot. Between the holidays and work, we were in big trouble.
And the length of this episode. So we decided to split this into two parts for our own sanity and the sanity of our listeners.
This thing took on a life of its own, I'm sorry.
Nearly killed us in the process. So today we will cover up until the end of the trial, and then on Thursday we will post a bonus episode about the aftermath and what became of the guys.
All right, so we are almost done with the bonded vault, and our listeners won't have to wait until next week to be finished with it, and we don't have to wait until next week to be finished with it. All right, let's get into the mailbag. Our listener Louie emailed us. I was wondering if you had any information regarding Orlando Napolitano. Apparently, he was a made man in the New England Mafia, but based in Portland, my hometown. Did the Patriarca family have a crew in Maine? I know you guys love saying how all roads lead to Maine.
Well, that is for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But you guys will have to wait until a little later in the season to hear the answer. The entire episode will be about Orlando, Mickey Naples, Napolitano, and his kids and his crew.
Well, Louie, I hope it's worth the wait, and hopefully everyone else will think it's worth the wait, too.
I think it will be. Okay, let's get moving with the vault trial. I want to get something out of the way before we get started. Up until now, we have not discussed Robert McCaskill, who was arrested in
Leominster.
Leominster. It makes no sense, you guys.
Leominster.
On December 7th, 1977, or Lawrence Lanou, who was arrested the following month. McCaskill and his wife had been living under the aliases of John and Kathy Carlson prior to his arrest. The charges against both men were dropped by the state of Rhode Island in 1982.
Well, thank you for clearing that up. I feel like this was the largest crew heist in history. How can you have this many guys involved and not have issues?
Like herding cats. And speaking of rounding up, when we left off last week, the boys had all been arrested. 2 were being held in Massachusetts and the rest in Rhode Island.
I've been flip-flopping back and forth about how we were going to lay this episode out. And so at first I was thinking we would address each of the guys separately. But then halfway through organizing all of your amazing research and notes, I decided that we should go in chronological order as much as possible.
I think that is the best idea, so let's do it.
Okay.
So last episode, we left off with the boys getting scooped up. After the arrest, the Rhode Island Attorney General told the press, quote, I don't think we will ever know the total amount of the value of the property taken in that holdup. Some of the diamonds and precious jewelry may have been disposed of, and we would have no way of determining what they are worth because the people who had those boxes have not been willing to come forward, unquote.
As we mentioned in the previous episode, initial reports had the haul ranging from $105,000 to $2 million. We'll get into more detail about the stolen items shortly. The Providence Chief of Police, Walter McQueenie, stated, quote, we have no evidence to substantiate that the robbery was anywhere near $2 million. Even with the 7 people in custody, we have no evidence to substantiate that claim, end quote.
In November, $105,000 worth of claims had been submitted by box holders. Mayor Buddy Cianci told the press that he didn't believe that the heist had anything to do with organized crime. But by the time the trial had ended, it was ranked as the second largest heist in U.S. history at $3 million.
So can you explain to me how we got to the $30 million number by the time of the publication of The Last Good Heist in 2016? I can't make the numbers work. And I know that supposedly the information was alluded to in the 302s, but I didn't actually see that anywhere.
No, it was just the 64,000 whatever. So the 64,000 number got thrown around a lot, and I think that's where the math came from. But the 30, I have no idea. I think it's just an extrapolation based on some stuff. I don't know.
All right.
But
I won't go on a tirade.
I haven't seen anything that substantiates that.
Okay, I'll be quiet, and I'm going to save all my energy to talk about Raymond.
Oh, your favorite person.
All right. Your favorite amateur PI guy. Okay, so Raymond went to the AP again in late January of 1976 and complained, quote, "The worst criminal can commit the worst crime in the world and then walk away supported by the taxpayers for the rest of his life just by mentioning the name Raymond Patriarca," end quote. And we all know that was a shot at Jack Kelly.
Was it ever? And you know Jack read that line for line with his morning coffee.
Oh, for sure, grumbling the entire time. As for Raymond, he wasn't done. He took his shot at the journos, too. Newspapers need this kind of perjury to sell newspapers, and the corrupt federal officials need this myth to justify their large salaries.
And you know the quote-unquote corrupt federal officials Raymond was referring to were H. Paul Rico, who by this time had moved on to the sunny beaches of Miami, thanks to Richie, and Denny Condon, who was less than a year away from his retirement.
And there was no doubt about who Raymond meant.
So much so that within a couple of days, an unnamed FBI agent dropped in on Raymond and Jr. at the Coinomatic asking for the names of the so-called corrupt federal officials. The names of the agents are redacted in the 302s, but as we said, it had to be H. Paul Rico and Denny Condon because Raymond said that they lied in their testimony against him and that their lies led to his incarceration.
And of course, the Fed felt compelled to defend his colleagues, saying that they were honorable men. Too bad Raymond didn't live to see that he would be vindicated in a strange turn of events, and that the man who was the catalyst for it all was certainly someone who he would have been the least person that Raymond would have expected.
Well, I'm going to hold my tongue on the honorable bit there.
Well,
lots of things I could say.
Yes.
Okay, but according to the same 302, Raymond wasn't done saying his piece. He told the special agent interviewing him, quote, "I can die right now and be placed in my grave. I swear to you, I don't know any of the individuals involved in the bonded vault job."
And other than the Womets, I believe him, but Dussault told the feds that Raymond and his son each received a share of the loot at $64,000 each. But when the Fed confronted the two of them, they each vehemently denied it. Raymond continued on and said that he would not do anything to violate his parole and stated that his schedule was the same each day. He'd go to sit at the Coinomatic, spend the whole day there, and then go home, and Junior backed him up.
Yeah, spying on the neighbors.
Well,
Feds already knew this because they were spying on Raymond, parked there all day, every day, and followed his every move. And then before we move on, I do want to mention that Raymond lost his bid for a new trial in the Marfio Malay case later that month.
Mm-hmm. And that was never going to happen. In January of 1976, we had a very busy month, and Dussault wasn't the only one to turn state's evidence. Joe the Dancer Denisi hopped on the bandwagon and flipped by the end of the month. All the authorities would say was that the dancer was being held in protective custody. They left out the girlfriend, the wine deliveries, and Louis the Minor Bird.
Well, Louis the Minor Bird, come on.
I'm telling you, Louis the Minor Bird was the same Minor Bird that was in that little shop on Newbury Street. It was like some, like a high-end thrift shop, antique-y thing, and Louis the Minor Bird was in there. Now, that had to be like, I was probably, I want to say, 9-ish, so 1978, 1979, somewhere around there. I'm telling you, how many Minor Birds named Louis were wandering around?
No.
Anyhow, back to this.
Okay. Well, Dussault was on the stand the same week, stating that Raymond gave the thieves the infamous slip of paper with the names of 4 box holders and instructed them to, quote, not miss these.
To whom did Raymond give the list?
Well, why do you have to ask these questions? You're just supposed to go along with it.
Says the rabbit hole girl.
But in all seriousness, we'll never know for sure, but you have to assume that Raymond told Jerry Womet who he wanted to rob the most, as they were likely the ones holding out on kicking up to him while Raymond was locked up. Dussault testified that he received the infamous slip of paper from John Womet.
We'll get into who the Deuce claimed gave John the slip in a bit. Let's move on to Ralph Skippy Burns, as the investigation leading up to the trial impacted not just him, but his parents and their house in Warwick, Rhode Island.
Just as we're going through this, it really is reminiscent of the 1950s Brinks trial. Remember how they destroyed Specky O'Keefe's sister's house, even ripping open her ottoman? And then FBI agent Green had to return the search warrant when he came up empty-handed.
Listen, I remember, and it also reminds me of the Plymouth mail robbery investigation and when they destroyed Tommy Richards' backyard patio, the basement, and that was all on an informant's testimony, too.
A single informant. One single informant.
Who was also a degenerate gambler. Okay. And just like Tommy Richards and just like the Brinks investigation, it was a fruitless endeavor. On January 9th, 15 Warwick cops and Rhode Island state troopers arrived at the Burns family home to search the premises for items that could link him to the heist. Earlier that day, they were also searching the marshes in the area for the body of Richard Taglianetti, who went missing sometime in 1975. At first, the authorities did not disclose whose body they were searching for, but a week later they admitted that it was Taglianetti. He had been missing since early May of 1975, a full 3 months prior to the heist, so trying to link him to the bonded vault is ridiculous to me.
No body, no crime. Just saying.
I know.
But digging in the marshes and trying to implicate Taglianetti wasn't enough for them. One of your favorites, Colonel Walter Stone of the Rhode Island State Police, closed off Randall Road to anyone who couldn't prove they lived in the area. Full-on melodrama.
And like I said, they found nothing.
Not a gosh darn thing.
12 days after the search, the Deuce was into his second day of pretrial testimony. He stated that his state estimate of the haul was $3 million, and he fingered Junior as one of the 12 men who shared in the spoils. Contrary to later statements that the heist was delayed a day, Dussault stated that they pushed it off because Junior told them that a machine gun had to be removed from one of the vaults before they could rob the place.
Well, that makes absolutely zero sense. If they were robbing at Raymond's behest, why wouldn't they just take the machine gun and return it to him with the rest of the haul?
The man was a liar or great at retelling a story that he was told to tell. I don't know. But to be clear, the Deuce did not claim to have direct contact with Junior, but rather John Ouimet did, and that he told the Deuce. And Junior supposedly gave the now infamous sheet of paper containing the 4 names to Ouimet.
Although Levine said there were only 3 names, as we recounted in the previous episode. Dussault also testified that the loot was then driven to Chucky's house on Gulf Avenue in East Providence. The bags were dumped onto the bed. It was there that they split $700,000 in cash 11 ways, which is how they got to the $64,000 each payout.
But Walter Ouimet was only given $5,000 according to the Deuce, right?
Right, because he claimed it was to compensate him for stealing a vehicle in Connecticut that they used in the heist.
But the math makes zero sense to me. First of all, he testified that after the haul was dumped out on the bed, the money wasn't actually counted. Now, how do you not do a count, especially if you're doing an 11-way split?
Well, maybe none of them were actually capable of counting.
I can't. And math was definitely not their strong point. The Deuce claimed that there were 14 silver bars weighing 40 to 50 pounds each. First of all, the largest silver bars are 1,000 ounces, which is 62.5 pounds, and the weight, whether that's in grams or troy ounces or whatever, are stamped right on the bars. Now, if you're looking at 14 62-pound bars of silver, it's like the only time in your life you're going to see this. You don't remember like what was on there, and you dumped these onto the bed, and just a couple of months later, you can't actually recall it? Come on.
But they had a calculator.
Yeah, okay. All right. They put the booty into a variety of different sized baskets. Okay, so we're putting these 60-pound silver bars into baskets. But they didn't have enough baskets, so they had to go get shopping bags.
Double shopping bags so they wouldn't rip open because the stuff was so heavy.
I can't. The Deuce went on to say that he, John Ouimet, Burns, and Flynn stayed behind and decided that Burns would bury everything but the cash in his backyard. It was to be sold later and then the proceeds used towards the split.
Still doesn't make sense. I don't understand.
I know.
Okay, but there's nothing in Burns's yard. Who fenced the stuff?
I have no idea. Where did it go?
Okay.
Nothing was ever recovered. I mean, none of it makes any sense.
Well, not to jump ahead, but by the end of the trial, the state had to concede that they had no idea how much the haul was and likely never would. But that didn't stop them from conducting the longest and most expensive trial in Rhode Island state history.
79 days long, and that is not including Dussault's testimony at the bail hearings.
Think about that.
No.
Well, let's bounce out of the courtroom for a bit. The journalist wanted to know more about Dussault, and what better place to go than his old neighborhood in Lowell. His old friends and neighbors said money meant nothing to him, and he would blow all his money without caring about it at all. It was gamble, gamble, gamble.
It makes me wonder about the tale that the Deuce told about Chucky. being a degenerate gambler. Was he describing himself instead of Chucky?
Well, Chucky was many things, but I suspect Dussault was deflecting.
And speaking of those two, Barbara Oliva identified Chucky Flynn in the courtroom on January 21st. In addition to the ID in court, she testified that on August 26th, she had identified a photo of who at the time she described as the first man, Dussault. And she provided the police with a description of the second man who she would later learn was Chucky.
And as we mentioned in the last episodes, she had some difficulty making the in-person ID of Dussault. And speaking of making an identification, the FBI lab had analyzed a pair of coveralls that were recovered near the crime scene that Dussault admitted to purchasing for the robbery to have hair from two individuals, one white and one black. Chucky's attorney offered the alternative theory that Dussault's partner in crime wasn't Flynn, but rather a neighborhood friend named Harry.
Well, obviously that theory didn't gain any traction, but I still feel that more than a few of the men he fingered for the crime actually had nothing to do with it. Now, whether that was out of some sort of revenge plot, at the suggestion of someone in law enforcement, or a combination of both, I don't know, but it's all too reminiscent of the Teddy Deegan murder trial and Jack Kelly's later testimony at several trials.
And the Brinks trial, but I've been saying that to you all along. I think that Dussault, Chucky, and the Wemets were the only ones, at least from those charged, who actually participated in the heist.
And weren't you able to string together my Blue Jay Valeka theory?
Yes, Denise and Tarzan and Flynn were part of Valeka's crew that was operating in Worcester in the 60s. Denise and his brother had been involved with Tarzan and Valeka in the car scam from 67 that we recounted in the first episode in this series. And Chucky Flynn and Valeka had done the panty raid together.
Oh, I forgot about the panty raid, and we are not going down that rabbit hole, so let's move on.
Okay. Tarzan was also accused of a 1974 robbery in Connecticut with McGaskill and Lanoux, so that's how the last two got roped into the mix. And Lanoux was wrapped up with Ralph DeMassie's hijacking crew. So Dussault probably had a beef with Valeka from the time they were in at Walpole together or something.
Well, we'll get more into Valeka's story when we do the prison special on Memorial Day weekend.
He was another truly amazing character.
Well, he ran for office while he was in jail.
Hey, I'm telling you, he was an amazing character.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, but on January 26th, Dussault pleaded the fifth on 2 questions. But I thought if you had immunity, you couldn't refuse to answer questions under the Fifth Amendment.
Well, I thought so too, so I guess we're going to be looking up something else before, well, not before the bonus episode, because I don't have time for that, but before we get to the hit parade, I'm going to look that up. Just before he refused to answer those questions, his life had supposedly been threatened. Denise was scheduled to testify that same day, but he was not allowed to take the stand. To be clear, this was during the bail hearing for the others. What did the DA ask him, by the way?
If he had participated in a robbery in Massachusetts after the bonded vault.
Interesting. So 2 days later, Jacob Tarzan was transferred to Rhode Island for arraignment. He was charged with 23 counts. The judge told him that he would have to post $2,000 cash surety for each of the counts in order to make bail.
Poor Jake Tarzan. The two Wemets, Tillinghast and Flynn, were all denied bail. And speaking of Flynn, romance was still in the air. He and his girlfriend had a jailhouse wedding on Valentine's Day.
All I can think about is the whole Lika Kazbegi spectacle in Tbilisi. I can't remember if you were living there yet or working with me yet. She married a Georgian gangster in the jail. She had a custom-made gown for Marigold, who was that caterer down on, what's that? Not on Rustaveli. What the heck is that? I can't. Marjanishvili. And then she had this like big catered spread and A-list guests and all. It was.
Where did you get to go? Were you invited?
No, I wasn't invited. I was just the teacher. I was just her English teacher.
Man.
Anyhow.
I was before my time, but she made sure to let me know that she was married.
I forgot because Lika was one of your students.
Yeah.
And you had the mayor of Tbilisi, Kaki Kaladze's wife there, Anuki, as a student, too.
Yeah.
All right, let's not get sidetracked.
Anyway, but I don't think Chucky and Ellen's wedding was featured in the society column in fashion magazines like Lika Kazbegi's. It was actually pretty illicit. Chucky's attorney snuck in a local judge to quietly hold the ceremony. They wrote in the visitor's book that they had private business with Chucky. When the press found out, the judge claimed he performed the ceremony for an appropriate fee in order to legitimize a child.
So much I can say, and none of it is any good, so I'm going to move on. Okay. The day before Chucky's nuptials, the dancer identified Robert Papa and Anthony Fiore Jr. as the men responsible for the Civic Center heist back in May. He also told the judge that McCaskill and Lanou were participants in that heist. The dancer told the judge that he agreed to testify against his partners in crime in both cases in exchange for no jail time.
And again, those guys were all at Ralph DeMassi's crew, so
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
2 months later, jury selection began in the bonded vault case. The judge had denied a defense motion to dismiss the charges against Flynn, Burns, and Tillinghast. The defense also tried to have Tillinghast and Walter Ouimet's cases severed from the others, but those motions were also denied. Remember that 5 of the 6 men were able to provide alibis.
And those alibis were of zero help, and the boys boycotted the jury selection process in protest of the presence of uniformed stadies in the courtroom. After 5 days of jury selection, only 8 jurors had been seated. It took until May 22nd to complete the jury.
6 weeks, the longest in the state of Rhode Island's history at that point.
It probably still holds the record.
Oh, most likely. They were finally sworn in on May 26th, and the longest and most expensive trial in the state history was underway. Attorney Cicilline had submitted a motion to the court to prevent Raymond Patriarca's name being mentioned during the trial, as his notoriety could prejudice the jury. The judge agreed and decided that neither of the Patriarca's names could be used during the trial. They were to be referred to only as John Doe Sr. and John Doe Jr.
How original. The trial kicked off with the younger Levine testifying as to the origins of the $100,000 of his money that had been stolen from one of the vaults. He told the court that the money had been accumulated from various real estate transactions. When asked why the vault and not a bank, he said that it was as safe a place as any, especially considering it was owned by his family.
Yeah, I should have just kept it under the mattress.
Hey, Richie, Dad used to keep it in his shoes, and my mother figured that out pretty quick, and when she bounced, she took $40,000 out of the shoes and ran away.
Yikes.
Yeah.
Samuel Levine also provided testimony about the infamous slip of paper with the 4 names. We touched on that in the last episode, so I won't get into it again. Plus, Babe Koval, Jerry Geller, and Mike Rouse will all make a return later this season.
Samuel also testified that he was afraid he was going to be killed during the commission of the robbery.
Talk about more melodrama. And to add to the drama, the best man at Barbara Oliva's wedding was also one of the detectives who arrived on the scene after the heist and was involved in her identification of Chucky Flynn, but the defense attorney's objections were overruled.
There was actually plenty of drama to go around, and at the end of the month, Tarzan and Tillinghast lost their cool over how they were being handcuffed, and in the scuffle, Tillinghast had an injured wrist.
Well, it's like the state wanted the spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
The following day, the 2 witnesses from Las Vegas took the stand, a bellhop and a policeman. The bellhop identified Burns and Flynn in the courtroom, which corroborated Denise's early testimony that he, Burns, and Flynn had flown out to Vegas to meet Dussault after he was named in the newspaper as a suspect. The cop testified that he intervened after seeing a woman being harassed by 3 men in a van. He identified Jerry Tillinghast as one of those men, even though Denise never testified he was there. And he described Denise as looking like the old-time actor George Raft.
Denise was no George Raft, and he certainly didn't have George's perfect Greek nose over there. And George always played mobsters, but he was 100% German.
I am not a borderline geriatric like you, so I didn't even know who Raft was before this.
I am not that old, and you are just bitter and jealous.
That's probably true.
Well, yeah, maybe just a little bit. The day after the Vegas guys testified, the government star witness took the stand. He identified Flynn, Tarzan, and Walter Ouimet. Some inaudible words were exchanged between Flynn and Dussault, but the journalist reported that the entire day was anticlimactic.
Dussault claimed that he turned state's evidence because the cops told him that his only friend, Chucky Flynn, had been killed.
And I call utter BS. That makes 0 sense. And there he was trying to put his only friend in the can. Come on. I want to know who bought that sob story.
Don't get riled up with me. I agree with you. And on the flip side of that, he also claimed his friends tried to kill him. But the judge refused to allow the jury to hear that tale.
The prosecution rested its case on July 9th. On July 12th, it was the defense's turn. Brower told the court that Dussault and Denise were liars and vindictive schemers. He went on to say that the men who robbed the vault with Dussault and Denise were free and in possession of the multi-million-dollar haul.
The jurors heard that Dussault and his girlfriend were likely Christmas-time bank robbers in a Worcester holdup at the end of 75. So maybe that's the job Dussault pleaded the fifth on earlier in the year.
It has to be.
As for the alibis of the defendants, James Conway testified on behalf of Skippy Burns. He testified that Skippy was among the workmen who moved his boat to a Pawtucket dock that day, and Burns would later take the stand insisting he had nothing to do with the robbery.
Walter Ouimette's wife testified that he was home the evening that he was supposedly stealing the van that was used in the heist. A Lowell buddy of Dussault's testified that the Deuce had told him that he had pulled off a big score and planned to frame a group of guys for it.
When Tarzian took the stand in his own defense, he told the court that the day before the robbery was his birthday and he got bombed. He said he had a terrible hangover and spent the rest of the heist working on cars at Art's service station. John Ouimette's alibi was that he was seen by Eugene Fletty at a Warwick auto body shop. The defense claimed that the Providence police and the Rhode Island Stadies had been intimidating him to change his testimony.
In case anyone was wondering about what happened to the prison guard who went on a bender with Dussault before his escape, he was on trial at the same time. Russell R. Beard was charged with allowing the escape. Upon his conviction, he resigned from his position, but he was given a suspended sentence.
Then on August 2nd, Chucky Flynn finally took the stand in his own defense. He vehemently denied his involvement, and the prosecution declined to cross-examine him. The defense then called Everett Zolano to the stand. He had been installing storm windows at the home at 5 Gulf Avenue at the time Dussault claimed that the haul was brought there. Zolano said that he was at the home that day for 3 hours and never saw anything being brought in or out of the home.
Just before the defense rested, they put James R. Hunt on the stand. He stated that a woman who said she was a friend of Dussault's had contacted him in November, claiming that Dussault was in fear of his life because a group of men from Atlanta wanted him dead. The woman then said that Dussault wanted to make a deal with the authorities in the bonded vault case and receive $100,000 and a new identity in exchange. Hunt said he contacted attorney Robert Kelly.
Right. We spoke about this briefly in the last episode and mentioned that the newspapers had gotten a hold of the story in November.
And again, this negates his whole claim that they told him Chucky was killed and all of that crap. The attorney told Hunt that the money was a dead issue. According to Hunt, Dussault said that the money was no longer a problem because the guys in Atlanta had backed off. Hunt stated that Dussault was willing to hand over some bodies to get a deal and that one would definitely be Flynn, as he didn't lend a hand to help him with his Atlanta problem.
He's in Atlanta. All I can think is a pen.
Well, no, what he was saying that the guy who actually did the crime with him, this Mystery Harry guy, was a black gangster and that he was connected to these guys in Atlanta. They were supposed to give these guys money. They didn't, and they wanted to kill Dussault because of that. It's very far-fetched.
Okay.
But
Hunt testified that he told Dussault that he didn't want to be involved with hurting someone he knew, especially Flynn, so he should give up someone else. He said Dussault said that no one would believe it, even if the real thieves were caught, because one of them was black.
Well, he didn't use those exact words, but that was the gist of it. The following day, there was a special session for rebuttal witnesses, and finally on August 11th, the case was given to the jury.
The next day, the jury returned their verdicts. Charles Chucky Flynn was found guilty, along with John Ouimette and Skippy Burns. Jake Tarzian, William Ouimette, and Jerry Tillinghast were found not guilty. The verdicts were delivered while 10 uniformed police officers flanked the courtroom and a state police special weapons team guarded the exterior of the courthouse. More melodrama straight out of Law and Order, I'm just saying.
Totally.
The jury consisted of 8 men and 4 women, and the trial lasted 79 days, of which the jury was sequestered the entire time.
And truly, the whole story was never short of drama, including the Deuce sporting a bulletproof vest while on the stand and shedding tears during his testimony, but it was finally over. Hunt went AWOL the day after he had taken the stand, and the prosecution was able to strike his testimony from the record. Burns, who had no prior record, was convicted of kidnapping and robbery. Flynn and John Ramette were also convicted of kidnapping and robbery.
Biting my tongue on the Hunt thing.
Mm-hmm.
The reporters asked Flynn if he could forgive the Deuce and what he would do if he saw him on the street. Chucky said he couldn't say how he would react, and Flynn was also facing murder charges thanks to the Deuce running his mouth about the Joe Schiavone murder, fingering Ralph DeMasi and Jerry Tillinghast. The Deuce claimed that DeMasi, who the court said was AWOL at the time of the trial, had told him that Flynn was the shooter.
DeMasi was in custody at the time of the Schiavone murder.
Okay, well, we'll save that for when we do this trial, I think.
All right. Flynn said he wasn't concerned about the charges as he was in Canada at the time of the Schiavone hit. Sentencing took place in early February 1977, and all three men were given life sentences.
Okay, on Thursday, we will release the fourth and final part of our Bonded Vault series, and all I can say is thank goodness.
Indeed. And next week, we will dive into the hit parade of 1976. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.